Hello, Pod Smashers of the Internet, and welcome to another episode of
Itty Bit Pod Smash,
Where Gaming Goes to Grab a Beer. We are your hosts,
Penguin and Termite. I am Penguin.
I am Termite, and we are a weekly video game podcast smashing together ideas that you care about with video games.
That's right, and if it sounds like we're going fast, it's because we're going fast at the speed of light this week, because we are talking about lighting design in video games. And honestly, it may be the most, single most important topic in video games, because video games, at the end of the day, are just light. Energy in one. They run on electricity, and they get beamed into our brain via light impulses. So,
that is true.
This is kind of foundational. This entire topic should have been episode 1, I guess, but whatever. So we're gonna be talking about lighting and lighting design, and we're gonna answer all of your questions about ray tracing and ambient occlusion and anti-aliasing and all that fun stuff that you've had questions about. I don't know, whenever you've heard us say those terms. So, yep. But before we get into all that, we are where gaming goes to grab a beer. So what are you drinking tonight?
I am drinking one of my beers left over from Sean, who left a bunch here. This is one I did not get when he was here. Brewed by RAR Brew, or RAR Brewing. I don't really know how you pronounce that. This is called 10 Layers. It's an Imperial Dessert Stout.
No way!
You have one too?
He sent me home with that one.
Nice.
So...
You have it right now?
Yeah, I was gonna.
Nice.
Damn it!
Well, there you go.
Drink it on the pot. I was gonna be like, "Yay, Sean!" And I figure.
Well,
wow.
Now we can talk about it together.
I'm
awesome.
drinking that as well.
Hey, we've been doing this thing remotely now for 52 weeks in a year. It's been more than a year, probably 60 episodes remote, and we have never accidentally had the same beer.
It's true, yeah.
That's amazing.
That's pretty crazy.
So here we are. It is an Imperial Dessert Stout with chocolate cookie dough, 1 pint, 11%, brewed by RAR Brewing in Cambridge, Maryland.
The chocolate coating makes it go down easier.
Yeah, it's very stouty. Yeah,
that was a quote from Princess Bride, by the way.
I haven't seen the movie in a long time. What do you think of this beer? This is thick.
Oh my gosh, the movie's amazing. The beer is very thick. I'm glad I did not, no offense to Sean, I'm glad I actually didn't drink this at the cookout, because, oh boy, it was a hot day, and this is not a great beer for a hot day, but in my very freshly working air-conditioned house, it's great. It tastes great. It's perfect. It is very chocolatey. Maybe the chocolatiest beer I've ever tasted. I've always drank beer and I'm like, oh yeah, this tastes like it has hints of chocolate in it, but this is like drinking chocolate milk with alcohol in it. It feels like. Yeah,
it's very, very chocolatey, but it has that sharp boozy taste to it too. Are you there?
I'm here. Yeah, I'm here. Sorry,
okay.
I was pouring it, and it's in my Heavy Seas mug, which I think is fitting because of how just black this thick, inky blackness of this beer. It's a very, very beautiful color, but it has filled up to the very rim, so I need to take a sip now before I spill it on my computer.
Don't spill it on your computer. This is not the beer. But yeah, I think I actually got a sip of this beer at the cookout, and I guess we will talk about said cookout when we get to our favorite things. But yeah, this is a really good beer. Definitely hard to drink in the hot sun, but like you said, I'm in my basement where my office recording space is, and this stout is perfect for tonight. So I'm okay with that. Mm-hmm. It's been a very long day.
It's almost, I got caramel too. I get caramel on the back end. You get that?
A little bit.
Yeah.
I don't like caramel, so it would normally be highlighted as a nasty thing, and I'm not getting too grossed out. So if it's there, it's very, very, very subtle.
I'm getting a lot of caramel. I don't know why. It's basically like chocolate on the front, caramel on the back, and I don't.
Well, it has a picture of a 10-layer cake on there. So my wife's actually made one of those cakes before, and they're amazing.
I believe 10 layers of cake just sounds a little bit excessive.
That's it.
But
it's a whole different thing.
If you're going for excess, then by all means, it's good. It's very good, very thick, delicious. I'm into it. Thank you, Sean, once again for the delicious beer.
Thank you. Yay!
Oh, I'm so mad though, because as soon as you said RAR Brewing, I was like, oh no, you got the same one.
Yeah,
that's funny.
Yeah, it's funny because I have a whole refrigerator full of 6 different ones, and I chose this one tonight.
We're actually able to hit on a news story this week that will end up going live before our news show, but it's brand new, hot off the presses, and again, only timely because we're running behind on episodes, on our episode editing schedules, so we're able to get to this piece of news before even our news show, and that is that the rumored advanced new model of the Nintendo Switch was just announced today, and it was kind of disappointing.
Yeah, a little.
But,
it was definitely a lackluster thing.
yeah.
But what's funny is it was just like a video dropped on Twitter, like
Mhm.
with no don't like pre-order. No, there's still pre-orders haven't gone live, but there was no announcement. There was no like tune into YouTube at this time for a huge announcement about the Switch. No, it was just like I went to go check my phone in the early morning, and boom, there it was. Like, oh, hey, look, a new Switch was announced. It's like, what?
It's very
No
clear
fanfare.
they were trying to play down the fanfare.
Yeah.
Because they knew the expectations were really high. Anyways, we'll say what it is. It's officially called the Nintendo Switch OLED model. OLED standing for OLED. I don't know what the LED and LED stands for.
Organic LED, light emitting diode.
Light emitting diode, that's right.
Lighting. It's our topic for today.
I knew it. Yeah. So the new Switch basically it touts a new OLED 7-inch display screen, which I think is only 1.5 inches bigger than the current Switch's screen, and that's about it as far as graphical fidelity goes. It no 4K, no DLSS support, none of that stuff that people were rumored it would support. It does have a couple of new redesigns in other ways. Does it have a new sound?
Yep, it has increased. Yeah,
better
new
audio.
Sound,
better battery life, I think is what it has. It does have the other announced features where it's got a redesigned kickstand.
Yes, and that looks really nice.
It does look nice, but like $350 nice. I don't know. And then it also has a direct Ethernet port in the new dock. So it's got a slightly redesigned dock that's got a Ethernet cord built into it, so you don't have to get an adapter anymore. Which again is cool. Be really nice if it was in the base Switch model too. I don't know. It just overall it was just very underwhelming based on considering the rumors, and more importantly considering the competition that they have to face. Again, like it's one thing to be playing in 2018 to be playing with hardware that was put together and designed in like 2015. I know the Switch came out in 2017, but the manufacturing and the hardware and all that stuff, the hardware itself is from 2015 or 2014, somewhere around that time frame. So yeah, it's one thing to be playing with like 3 or 4 year old hardware. It's a whole nother thing when like there's next gen consoles out and games like their third party support I imagine is going to tank in the next 2 or 3 years because
it's going to have to. Like these Switch ports that they're coming out with now, I'm just like, how?
Well, and from what I've been reading on Reddit, people don't think they run very well. The Switch ports of things like Doom Eternal and the Switch ports of there's a lot of games.
Tony Hawk's Pro Skater is the newest one that I'm aware of.
Right. Well, yeah. So people have been saying are just in general like, oh, okay, well, everybody wants Nintendo to come out with the promise of the Switch. The Switch compared to the PS4, it was great. It was a step down, but it was still good. It was like, okay, yeah, this is like almost PS4 quality in my hand. That's cool. Compared to the PS5, it's like, oh man, it's gonna start to show its age real fast. And I think they're not gonna have as many third-party games they can release for it because the hardware won't be able to run half these games.
Yeah, there's a couple of tidbits here. You mentioned the battery upgrade. So there's no new battery upgrade. The Switch had a revision in 2019 where they increased the battery life of the base Switch. And I think that's the one that persists here. There's not an additional battery upgrade.
I got you.
So it has a better battery life than the launch model, but it's the same battery life as if you got a Switch from 2019 to now.
Right. If you went to the Walmart and picked up a brand new Switch today, it would perform roughly the same in the battery department as the new model.
Another piece of information that came out after the announcement was that the dock is going to be sold separately. So that wired LAN port that you might like, you can get. Yeah.
Wait. You mean you'll be able to buy it individually as opposed to... Okay. I thought you meant that, like, the new Switch model doesn't come with a dock. You might have to buy that separately.
No.
Like,
it comes with
my
a dock.
God.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the new Switch one comes with a dock.
No.
In fact, it has a new slick-looking, like, redesigned, rounded-edged, white-colored dock. There's also a standard edition with the black dock and the colored Joy-Cons.
Aw, that will match with your... That'll match with your PlayStation.
Yeah, so if you got an entertainment center and you have a PlayStation 5 already and an Xbox Series X, this new Switch with the white Joy-Cons and the white dock would look really cool with it. But I just wanted to highlight you can buy that new dock separately. If you wanted a second dock for your Switch and want that wired LAN, you could have that as an option.
I don't play multiplayer games on my Switch.
Right. Yeah, and I don't know. I'm kind of torn about... I know a lot of people are clamoring for like a 4K Switch model, but I still feel like in... the masses, like the things that people like parents that buy Switches, like no one's talking about 4K except for us enthusiasts and like people who would listen to the show and like us. And so what Nintendo's doing from like a business strategy is just digging their heels in the blue ocean they've created. And it's like, no one's in this space. A console that you can dock or take with you, no one's there. And like you said, your use case might be you dock the most. So you have a need for like a 4K dock because you're playing it on your TV the most. And this new Switch would not benefit you at all. But if you're playing on the go,
they'll notice. The parents will notice when
Mhm.
their kid says, "Mom, why can't I play Elder Scrolls 6 on the Switch?" And the mom goes to the GameStop employee and says, "I would like to get Elder Scrolls 6 for the Switch." And they'll go, "No, it doesn't come out for the Switch." They'll be like, "Why not? I paid $350 for this thing." And then they'll be suddenly realize why.
And they'll be like,
the
well,
Switch is inferior.
Bethesda is owned by Microsoft, and Elder Scrolls 6 is going to be an Xbox exclusive, so you can get it on PC.
I mean, my answer would just be, there's no way Elder Scrolls 6 would even run on that thing. Do you know what's inside of it?
Right, yeah.
Not able to run Elder Scrolls.
Right, so all of that said, I mean, they've sold like 80 plus million units as of May, I think. It's crazy. Nintendo is still printing money with the 80 million Nintendo Switches. If they were all the Switch Lite at $200, that's like 11 point something billion dollars.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean,
they're making money hand over fist.
Nintendo's strategy since, the Wii has mostly been to target, demographics beyond gamers. Right. And the Switch appeals to that. The Switch, many of my friends online who I would never even dream that they would ever purchase a PlayStation 5. They all have Switches and are excited about them. So it's like, all right, yeah, I get it. I get what Nintendo's doing. But, throw a bone to the people who made your company what it is sometimes. I don't know. They don't owe us anything. But, I want to see Nintendo competing at that higher level. I want to see what Nintendo's capable of with their properties on awesome hardware. But that's just me. I get it.
Yeah, and I was listening to Kind of Funny Games Daily, and they did a whole rundown on this. And I didn't even think about this concept until Gary Whitta brought it up. But Nintendo hasn't really competed in the graphics space since the GameCube era. That's the most recent one that actually was competitive against PS2 and the original Xbox. But if you remember, the 360 and the PS3 came out, HDMI, 1080p TVs, games are running at 720p, like all this new stuff, Blu-ray, HD DVD, and then the Wii comes out, and there's no HDMI. Its highest resolution is 480, and it looks horrible on like these new LCD machines. And they're just operated in their own space. And then the Wii U came out while the PS4 and Xbox One, the Wii U wasn't even comparative in performance. There were some ports to it and stuff, and that flopped. But if you look at their consoles that competed on the graphics plane from the Nintendo, Super Nintendo, N64, and GameCube, those four consoles, their sales declined with each generation. And it wasn't until they re-innovated themselves with the Wii taking a step back and away from graphics and be more appealing to something like the family masses and grandma, when they made one of the best-selling console, their single best-selling console of all time, and that was the Wii, went on to sell over 100 million. Still not as much as the PlayStation 2, but that's Nintendo's big success story. And it had nothing to do with graphics, nothing to do with hardware. It was way weaker.
But Zelda deserves to be in 4K, 60 frames per second.
Well, sure, we think that.
It deserves it.
We are a very, very small minority of gamers in the world.
With instant load times. I need it. I need it, Termite.
Thank you for mentioning load times. That's one other aspect of this. It's kind of disappointing. They did double the storage space from the original Switch had 32 gigabytes of internal storage, and this one has 64, which is great for like digital stuff. But they didn't talk about any upgrades regarding the load times, because Breath of the Wild does have some pretty long load times. And it would be nice to have had
compared to these days. I'm spoiled on my PlayStation 5, man.
Oh, I know. It's so different now.
I can't play a game that has load times longer than like 25 seconds without wanting to break something. Tongue in cheek. I'm being sarcastic, but or facetious. Yeah, it is pretty bad. I just see something on Reddit today. It was a guy who designed. This is my last comment, then we can move on. I saw a guy on Reddit who designed. His whole comment was he designs unnecessary prototypes for products that aren't needed, and he designed this inflatable thing that you put your controller in, and then you have hands, and it's designed so that you can rage quit and chuck your controller across the room without damaging your controller. I was like, I love it. It's so funny. All right, cool. So moving on, rage quitting because of load times is not our favorite thing, but
doing this podcast is our favorite thing.
Doing this podcast is our favorite out of sync thing.
Favorite things. A
Favorite-
segment of our show where we talk about something that we're digging. Something as shallow as
something as shallow as a cool brand new flashlight, or as deep as this concept that the speed of light is the universal speed limit and nothing can go faster than it because it is the speed limit, and therefore it is a indicator that our universe is actually just a simulation because it's basically the random access memory of the universe.
Nice.
Deep.
Yep, deep.
So, yeah, what's your favorite thing?
My favorite thing was our 4th of July / my son's second birthday cookout extravaganza that I had this past weekend. It was 2 cookouts in a row, and about a week before this happened, not a lot of people confirmed that they were coming, and so we're trying to plan what we're going to do and like talk it up a little and like what are we going to buy. And I went to the store, we prepared for some people, and then a whole lot of confirmations came in, and I was like, I got so excited because I was like, people, like, we all vaccinated because I know everyone that came individually, and I'm pretty sure everyone that was there had gotten at least 1 shot. And we are super excited to come out of the pandemic. This is the first big multi-household event that I have been to / hosted, whatever, anything in like the last 12, 14 months. And we had a small July 4th get together last year with like family only, and it was like weird social distance masks and like gloves, and the food was really controlled and stuff, and it was a lot more buttoned up. But this year was like awesome. It was just everyone let loose, everyone had a good time. We had so many people. It was like 19 adults, a bunch of kids, your son, my kids, and our friend Matt, friend of the show. We interviewed him on the show. His son was running around, and it was wonderful to just see everyone talking, everyone gathering, have conversations all over the place. And then the second cookout was my son's second birthday, so we had family over, and the same thing kind of happened again. It was like kids running around, everyone just talking, having a good time, lots of drinks, margaritas, beers, food, hot dogs, hamburgers, potato salad, pasta salad. I know we did not have potato salad, but it was awesome. So I just love peopling again. I love getting out there. I love hosting. I hope everything came together well. It's so hard to focus on entertaining the crowd when I'm focused on trying to eat or get everyone fed and cook and grill and serve and be hospitality is taxing. So I was very, very busy and a little hectic, not able to like land with any single conversation more than a few minutes. So I hope everyone had a good time. We even had fireworks. It was great. So the 4th of July, my son's birthday, my wife made a homemade cake extravaganza was extremely exhausting. I was dead last night, and I'm still exhausted today. I needed a day off, and I could not take it because I had a work trip to do today, and so it was rough. It was very taxing, but it was also amazing. So it is clearly my favorite thing, and that's what I'm drinking this beer from because Sean, friend of our show and family member of mine, brought a butt ton of beer. And is butt ton family friendly? Because I think it's pretty funny.
Sure.
I know my son thinks it's funny.
Ton of butts.
And yeah, so I'm drinking this leftover. Thank you, Sean, for the beer. And that's my favorite
thing. I'm drinking it too, so that's great. Yeah, no, it was fun. It was fun to... My comment about your cookout was that it was fun to meet your friends. Your friends from... They're all from high school. It's like a group of friends from high school, right?
Yeah. They're childhood friends. Even longer than that.
Yeah,
I mean, I've known Jimothy since elementary school, so...
Well, it's fun. My comment is that, so it was great to meet them all, because, again, I've met many of them online playing games with you guys. But okay, so I'll back up and just say, in general, when you talk to someone about their close friends from that they grew up with, or that kind of were their friends during that kind of critical growing stage of their life, when you finally meet them, you're like, oh, okay, it's a group of rednecks, or it's a group of preppy kids or sports kids. Everyone thinks that their group of friends is this unique, everyone's got the role they fill. The Ninja Turtles, right? They're all so different and unique.
I'm just thinking of Mean Girls more than anything else.
But everyone thinks that their group of friends is like that. But then from the outside looking in, you're people on the outside tend to be like, oh yeah, no, it's just they're a group of, they're all sports guys or whatever, But I couldn't say with certainty. I was like, that was a very eclectic group of individuals, a group of guys. They were all very, had very distinct and unique personalities. And so it was kind of interesting to be like, oh yeah, this group of people used to hang out together and do stuff and were close friends and bonded over stuff. It was kind of cool to be an outsider looking in on that dynamic. And I was like, because that's not the case with everybody. I think it's the case with my group of friends, my group of friends outside of our friendships and inside of our friendships. I could talk about our friends and be like, yep, there's a lot of strong and unique personalities there. But it's actually fun to see it from the outside looking in on someone else's group of friends and be like, yeah, what an interesting group of people, a group of characters. So yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
Yep.
My favorite thing is, I mean, your cookout was a blast, so it's definitely up there on my favorite things for the week. I will say my specific favorite thing though is once again stumbled across another great show on HBO Max called Doom Patrol, and it takes place in the DC universe. It's actually based off of a DC comic of the same name, characters with the same characters, but it's like Umbrella Academy.
Okay.
Kind of like it's basically the premise is like they're all, even the narrator says at the beginning, this isn't a story of superheroes, it's a story of super zeros. It's a bunch of characters that are just like they all have like crazy trauma and they're all kind of just in a rut in their lives, but they have powers. And there's an inciting incident that causes them to have to kind of band together and work together to stop a bad guy. And it's really, really well done. It's really unique. And the tagline during the trailer was like, what doesn't kill you makes you weirder. And that's really the vibe of the show is like, there's like a hellfire and brimstone preaching Baptist preacher, his street preacher that is a cockroach. He's a cockroach that goes, I shall rain the Lord's fury upon you. It's nuts. There's a donkey that has another universe inside of his stomach, so he farts people and pukes people out of him at certain points. It's crazy. It
sounds insane.
Wild, hilarious,
like a
profound
weird
show. It's really great. But it's got like 90 Rotten Tomatoes, both the critic rating and the viewer rating are like in the 90s. But like I don't see it marketed. I don't see it like advertisements for it. There's 2 whole seasons out on HBO Max, and I've seen like maybe 2 or 3 commercials for it over the course of the last few years. Like it's a really good kind of sleeper hit, and I don't know why it's not as popular as it should be. So Doom Patrol, check it out. If you like things like Umbrella Academy, you'll like Doom Patrol.
I've never watched Umbrella Academy.
It's also very good.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can have a runner-up favorite thing is that we finished Mayor of Easttown, which was your recommendation, and it was amazing. So that's done, but it was only 7 episodes, so I didn't get a lot of gaming time in this past week.
What did you think of those twists?
They were great, and I wanted more. I wanted a bigger epilogue than I got, which I always do. Because I was like, I want a whole other episode that's just an epilogue.
They did a pretty good job. They did a pretty good job wrapping things up, all things considered, tying up loose ends. Yep. So good. Yep. It's one of those shows that I think that would be done a disservice if they did another season of it. I'm like, they would have to come up with a really good, compelling, emotional plot for it to actually like make sense. I don't know, because I feel like
it's really concise.
Yeah, tied up
everything. Exactly, I love it. Yeah. Yep. Cool. And Kate Winslet's character, Mare, is my wife's spirit animal. Like, entirely.
Kate Winslet's performance as Mare was remarkable.
Awesome. So, yeah. Did they win awards for that?
Probably. I think she did win awards, but...
All right. I hope so. Right. She earned it. What's up?
Speedy quick. We have time for like a minute speed round of Fast Speed of Light, DLC.
DLC.
DLC stands for downloadable content. It is a segment of our show where we have a conversation you wouldn't normally have about video games. And today's DLC is... Which video game character do you think looks the best in HDR?
Oh, character?
Yeah.
Does it have to be a character?
No. What's the best video game? What's the best looking video game in HDR? We'll throw ray tracing out there as well. What do you think? Like,
that's 2 different answers, homie.
Yeah, I know. Okay, all right, fine. The 2 different answers then. You get 2 different answers. What character? What game do you think looks the best in HDR? What game do you think looks the best in ray tracing? Which I totally understand is a conversation that people do normally have about video games, but we're having it now.
We are.
It's not quite DLC. I clearly wasn't prepared for this one, so let's go.
Right as I take a sip. Okay, so HDR, the best implementation that I have seen and absolutely adore is Sea of Thieves. Because the way the sun interacts with the waves and the cloud models in the ocean is absolutely gorgeous. I take so many screenshots all the time, and I just want more. Like the moonlight is even a thing, how the reflections off the ship, how HDR, like the glinting of the treasure, it's amazing. So I think I'm more like appreciative of my TV's HDR capabilities with Sea of Thieves than I have been through a lot of other games. So with ray tracing, at first I thought Ratchet and Clank, because that really did nail it. It was awesome. But the more I think about how ray tracing can be used for more than just reflections, which is a spoiler for the rest of our show, Returnal, I think, uses ray tracing exceptionally well because ray tracing can be used to illuminate not just actual reflections in like water and stuff, but it also helps with ambient occlusion. And that is like how shadows and characters are put in light and how they look in light and how the environment around them is lit as well. And so all of those reflections, how light kind of occupies a space when it is rendered, looks gorgeous in Returnal. So you don't really notice it unless you know what you're looking for, but Returnal's ray tracing is awesome.
Yeah, I would say for HDR, which stands for high dynamic range, it's so that HDR allows you to get those really dark darks and really bright brights. So it allows colors to pop in a way that, you know, normal TVs kind of don't, because they all kind of display at the same kind of range of light. And so, you know, we'll get to it in the podcast, but, you know, HDR has to be designed on both the game end and the TV end. So anyways, the game that first made me like a wow, HDR, this is actually a thing, was the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Even before Intergrade came out, the upgrades with Intergrade, but especially now with Intergrade, but like it was like things like the motorcycle and seeing the bright flame pulses coming in the very dingy, dark, you know, motorcycle hallway. Like that was just like, oh yeah, these colors are popping. Sometimes it takes a dark game that has like, and Final Fantasy is perfect because it takes place in Midgard, which is a very dark world, and then has those bright, shiny, you know, things like materia and spells and particle effects that just go pop, and you're like, woo, yep, that's color.
And Red 13's tail.
Yeah, for sure. I haven't gotten that far, so I haven't like seen it in action, but I imagine it's probably beautiful. The other thing the other answer with ray tracing would probably actually be Control's use of ray tracing was impressive, because you can actually see your character's reflection in the eyes of others, which is impressive. And so I remember turning on the ray tracing and just being like, because normally I think Ratchet and Clank is a sort of a more perfect implementation of ray tracing because it was built from the ground up with ray tracing in mind, as opposed to tacked on to a game that already existed. But I was very impressed with how Control ended up implementing it. You can see the kind of reflection of like on surfaces when you turn the ray tracing on full blast. You have to turn the frame rate down to do it. But when you have it on, it's like there are some floors that are like marble, and you can see the like. Not only can you see the reflection of the light, but you can see that the way the light reflects is different because it's marble. It's different texture.
Yep.
Whoa. Whew.
That's so definitely crazy. A feature of ray tracing. Yeah,
for sure. All right, cool. So that's DLC. So obviously we were talking about lighting and lighting design, and it's a huge part of video games. We will not condescend and try to explain what light is. The reality is, from a scientific point of view, I have a very, very only cursory understanding of what light actually is. But why is lighting design an important part of important element in video game design? Why is it like, why are there people whose entire job is lighting design and dealing with that in making video games? And what are the challenges of rendering lighting in a realistic way in video games?
Well, a good starting point that is definitely not, what did you say it was? Patronizing? Is that the word?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Everyone watches movies. Everyone appreciates movies. Everyone watches YouTube content, Twitch streamers. And if you watch any of that stuff, you know that lighting matters. With movies, it's cinematography. It's effects that they lay on after the filming is done, either CGI. It's all the way down to like where the camera is positioned and where the lights are shining on characters, stage lighting, character lighting, realistic light sources, all that stuff. Like the theory that they use and apply to cinematography is identical to what we want in 3D video game spaces. But with video games, they're interactive and they can change and they're dynamic. The camera is controlled by the player or not, but it still has multiple angles and such. But the principles are there. So if you look at how content is shot through a camera, when you're watching video content, you can already understand a lot of what we're about to talk about, because those principles are the underlying current that we want to highlight when it comes to rendering in video games. So if there's anything about film, cinematography, and lighting you can add to the conversation with your degree, that would be pretty cool. I don't know if you've had any interactions or discussions about that.
No, I mean, I obviously lighting design is really interesting and at play as well, because it usually takes place in a dark theater space, and you have to you illuminate the stage, right? But you can do some really cool things with lighting design. But one of the things I love about lighting design in theater that is true in what I would say almost all lighting design, since light is what illuminates our world, right? Like even outside of entertainment, like literally light is the backdrop. The reason why all of our horror stories take place at night is because there's no light. We can't see. We literally you literally remove one of our primary senses from the equation in our perception of the world, and it terrifies. Like, it's terrifying. So anyways, the reason I bring that up, the reason I bring up that primal aspect of it is because light is what illuminates the world, because light is what enables the play to take place, or the movie, or the video game.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard that the best lighting designers like to say that, like, the best lighting designers will never win awards because you will never know that they did a good job, because lighting is not supposed to be something that draws your attention.
Mm-hmm.
It's supposed to enable you to be drawn into the story. It's supposed to enable you to be immersed into the story. So the minute you notice, so it's actually the opposite. The minute you notice lighting design is bad. Now, obviously, there are people who are going to appreciate lighting design, and so therefore they're going to notice the good choices you make. So that's not quite a truism, but the idea is that, like, oh, the minute something is lit, like the minute you have a bad lens flare or something, or a poorly timed lens flare, unrealistic, something like that, or if the lighting is off, or even just the wrong color, or it doesn't match the mood that you're going for in the scene, then people are going to notice, and then that's when it's a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's true. I think that's kind of, like, in many ways, the origin of lighting design. Lighting designers who people who design video game lighting probably study theatrical lighting in some way, shape, or form.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Those fields definitely blend.
Yeah, so they definitely blend. So I think that is, so therefore I think that is still a truism in video game lighting design as well, is you gotta like, the average person shouldn't notice the lighting design. They should just be so immersed in the world and the story that you're presenting to them that they don't even think about it. So
yeah,
that's my only
lighting, and I would argue, is the single most important aspect of all graphic rendering. You can have the most incredibly detailed models with high polygon count, amazing textures, and it all looks horrible without correct lighting to go with it. And one of the prime examples, and one of the first things that stuck out to me that's recent, is Outriders. The textures and the models are gorgeous. It's 4K. It's 60 frames per second. The world is beautiful. It has great textures. There's no pop-in issues. There's great animations. There's good facial animations. There's some decent voice acting. But what stood out to me is the characters don't look well lit with their environment. They stand out. It's awkward. It's weird. And there's something going on. And that's one thing they've never addressed in any of all the patching and improvements. So I guess I'm just stuck with it. But that's just a quick example I think it's relatively easy for the regular Joe Schmo gamer to go pick out. If you want to see a good example of lighting, go check out Returnal. If you want to see a bad example of lighting, go check out Outriders. And I wouldn't say bad; it's just not up to par. Like, I noticed it.
Again, you picked two good games because they're similar types of games. They're third-person shooters with high-paced action and 60
it's
frames
almost
per second
like
speed.
We know what we're talking about.
So it's not just being like, go compare Outriders to Ratchet and Clank, because they're entirely different.
Right.
They're entirely different. You know what I mean? And then, no, you're literally saying go compare Outriders to go compare a high-paced third-person dark sci-fi story to another high-action third-person dark sci-fi story.
Yep.
And see how lighting changes the way the game looks and feels from a moment-to-moment gameplay. Yeah, good picks. I would say that one of the things about lighting design that makes it important is, and especially when it comes to rendering realistic lighting, is this idea that, like, every other form of graphical choice you can more or less get away with being creative about, but lighting lighting is so universal that, like, if the lighting is bad, no matter what it is, no matter how stylized the game is otherwise, if the lighting's bad, the rest of the game will look bad. Like, lighting is one of those things where you have to shoot for photorealism with it, because anything less than literally the word photon comes from the word light. Like, photorealism is a study of light in many ways, and so the light has to be right. But even highly stylized games like Borderlands, like, the lighting still needs to look right and look realistic. Otherwise,
I was just thinking of Journey and Wind Waker, which are very two highly stylized games that
use lighting really well.
Ridiculously good, like, awesome trailblazers in lighting with the unique art styles. The art styles just match perfectly with what they were going for, and that's what's awesome about lighting. It sets mood, tone, atmosphere, the feel of the game, how the player interacts and views their world is all affected by the work that's going on with the lighting. And a good example that's like not fun, whimsical, and bright is a horror game. Specific lighting techniques are used to drive tension, like make you not comfortable. Like you talked about dark spaces, produce fear. Everything's restricted, like lots of dark corners where enemies can hide from, makes you feel like you're insecure. You can use things like dark green filters to like color, like change the color palette of the screen. I'm thinking of like Outlast, which was that game where you're a photographer and you had like a night vision mode. It was like a different view. You had more awareness of the environment because it was more brightly lit, but it was this green hue that was still like gross. But in like PT, when you walk through the door and you initiate or invoke another loop and everything's red or everything's green or everything's blue, and like all three of those hues have a different effect on your psyche.
Oh yeah, because color in general is hugely influential. But I mean, not only does obviously portraying realistic color, but then also stylized color can completely change. I mean, I think of like Ghost of Tsushima and turning on the the Kurosawa mode where it's all white and black. It has a whole different feel than the game without it on. But even specific choices that are forced upon you, like coloring a hallway red in a horror game, is going to immediately trigger certain primal aversions. One of my favorite facts about the color red is, I don't know if you know this, but babies are born colorblind. They cannot perceive any color except for one.
Right.
And that color is red. And there's probably a very distinct biological evolutionary reason why they can only distinguish the color red. Yeah.
I'd cry all the time too if all I could see was red. But I love
it'd be like what is that? What's the show? The movie. It would be like Sin City, where it's white and black except pops of red.
Oh, that was great. Yeah, but there you go. That's a great example of using color and light to like affect the tone and atmosphere and everything I'm talking about here with like the feel of the thing. I specifically, thinking of horror games, remember Doom 3, how terrifying it was. The game was super, super dark. It was actually, Doom 3 was a step forward in technology. It was definitely one of those new bar setters of a game when it came to its shadow rendering, and we'll get into more of those techniques later. But the game was so dark, and you had to use a flashlight to see, but you couldn't have a weapon and the flashlight. You had to switch out to your flashlight to see, and then the moment you were attacked, you'd have to switch back to a weapon and kind of approach the combat. And everything was like dark red flash, lots of flashing, like strobe lighting going on with the emergency situation, and it was terrifying. Doom 3 scared the mess out of me. And then there's another example of like a dark kind of horror game, Dark Souls, with like the campfires being literal beacons of light. So the whole game is dark and it's a dreary hellscape, but like the campfires, that's where you can save. That's your checkpoint. That's where you turn in all your loot, if for better or worse. I never played Dark Souls, but I understand the concept.
Sure.
Where like you upgrade your character, like you cash in your experience or whatever, but you see a campfire in the distance, and it's got this graphical appeal to it where it's like, oh, there's a light out there, but also there's like an invigoration of hope, and like I've got to the next space, it's safe, my progress is saved, I'm not going to lose anything from this point on, and like, it's so awesome how like lighting affects that, but they've married that with game mechanics, and that was kind of the example I was drawing with Dark Souls, is marrying light techniques with game mechanics and player feeling. What do you think about that?
Sure. And I mean, well, yeah, and light has always, in many ways, light and, again, light is the basis of color, and color has constantly been used as a way of coding, hard coding, video game design into players' minds. Like, what's the first thing when you think when you see a green flash? When you break open something and something green drops to the ground, what do you think it is?
It's a common piece of gear.
Oh, I was thinking it's health. It's a health.
Oh. That's hilarious. It tells us exactly where we are in our game. Side note, I am exhausted from the loot systems in video games. So when I see, and you see like the tone that I just had when I was like, yeah, it's a common piece of gear.
No, I was thinking
I'm defeated.
Sure. But like, it's also like a side, it's video game code for, it's the health. This restores your health.
Yeah.
So that's just like a basic, but yeah, the idea of like, oh, there's the flash. It usually has like a flash or a glow to it, and that's lighting design that's meant to like draw your eye and indicate you need to go over here, you need to go do this, or consequently, if something brightly flashes red underneath you, or there's a big red circle on the ground, usually that indicates get the heck out because something's gonna hurt you here.
Mm-hmm.
I've always wanted to see someone do a video game where they flip those on their head. Green is bad, red is good. But
Ooh, that'd be
for the most
interesting.
part, they're shorthand for, green good helps you, heals you, restores you, saves you. Red bad, get away, run away, stay away. So yeah, it's you're very right about that use of lighting design.
So another interesting experiment that I'd love to put into everyone who's listening to this show, including you, in your head. Think about this next time you're playing a video game. If you're in a dark, closed-in corridor space and you're playing either a shooter or an adventure game, it doesn't really matter. Think about the pace that you progress through that area, and think about how you approach combat situations or puzzles or any sort of obstacles, and then do the same thing, hopefully in the same game, with a very bright, open area that's lit by the sun. And I didn't realize how, just in my own memory, I'm thinking of Metro Exodus has both sides of the equation. I am super fast and like loosey-goosey in the brightly lit sunny areas that are all open. Like, I don't really care. I'm kind of free, just like running. I'm sprinting a lot more. But in like the dark and dramatic corridor spaces, I'm very careful and like slower, and I'm checking corners and all of that. The only difference is the lighting, because it's the same game.
Right. Yep.
And everything else is the same, but the lighting has drastically affected my approach to the game.
Because Sekiro would have both as well. And in the open ones, I'm like dashing around, sprinting, zipping in and out of combat. And in the dark ones, it's like, okay, yeah. But part of that's too just the fact that, like, again, lighting can be used to obfuscate pits. And so sometimes you're literally just like, I don't know if I'm going to fall into a bottomless pit and die here. You know what I mean? Like, so there's definitely that aspect as well, where you're just like, there's that sort of distrust that you should have, because, again, darkness has a profound effect on the human psyche, because I can't see where I'm going and I don't know if I could fall, and creators can use that to their advantage.
It's a trap.
I want to talk. We're already at 50-minute mark here, so I want to talk about techniques. So let's jump down and talk about what are some of the techniques and technologies that are used to render realistic lighting. As we promised that we would talk about ambient occlusion.
We have to get there, right? That's
we have to at least
exciting.
Get there, yeah.
Some of these terms now, I'm given I know these things from history. Y'all PC gamers should know all this stuff because you've been given the graphical setting adjustments for all of these features for years, going all the way back to like Quake, and maybe that's where it started. But this is a very high level. We could have a deep conversation about every single one of these that could last an hour or two with each one. They're so deep. So I'm just going to hit the tips of these icebergs and we're going to move on, so that's not super dragging through the mud here, this conversation. But basic kind of things, lighting techniques, technologies, this is like programming stuff. Most of the time there are game engines. We've had a whole episode about game engines, so start there. Like, if you're really interested in this and you're super enthusiast and you care about this stuff greatly, go back and listen to our game engine conversation to get a foundation for what we're going to talk about now. But most of these features in lighting come from the game engine. So every engine's going to do it a little differently or offer the developer something more or less. And like each one's going to have a pros and cons and a high like weight on whatever features you get. So without further ado, light maps. That's kind of the first thing. This is kind of fun. So it's older technology. We don't really need it anymore as much. But what N64, PlayStation 1 era would do with a light map, you needed to create pre-saved light map files that would then be applied to the maps at runtime. And what you would do to create these files, you would adjust the lights to the materials in the image to save the render time by casting lights with the source in place. So you would say you have your map, you have your furniture, maybe it's a house, you would throw your lamp in there and you would capture how the textures react to that light. You would then remove the light and save the data on all of the lighting on the textures, and you would just simply adjust. That's a lot of adjusting going on. You would simply adjust the textures themselves, changing the brightness and saturation of the textures to save anything rendering. So if you go way back to like early Quake days or like those era, you'll notice there's no dynamicity, I think is the word. Nothing's dynamic. It doesn't change. It's very static. But like Half-Life 1 does this, where you walk into a room and there's a single light source lighting the textures, and that's it. Doesn't matter what your camera angle is, doesn't matter where you're standing, what you're doing. So that's kind of an original way of doing a light map. Those are still used today, but they're a lot more fancier and a lot more advanced things are going on than just that. But I thought that was pretty fascinating to learn. Like, oh yeah, you throw a lamp into a room and then save off the data and then remove the light, and here you go, you got all your lights, right? Do you have any ideas of like examples of what you think that you may have noticed this?
This all is blowing my mind when I just like step back and think about it for like what's actually happening on like a physical level. And it's like, in the real world, you have light sources and you have actual reflections, but in video games, all that's really happening is just individual pixels on your TV screen are lighting up a color and an intensity at a certain time, and it's all just programming that is indicating like, okay, what needs to light up in order to accurately reflect, like simulate, I should say, lighting. It's so crazy to me, so I'm just taking it all in.
All right, sweet.
Keep going.
Yeah, so the other very similar aspect to light maps is shadow maps, and so you kind of do the same thing, but you render the scene from the light's point of view, and everything you cannot see from the light's perspective is shadow. And so you save off the exact same data, and then you remove the light source, you throw in your light map, you lay on a layer of shadow maps, and if you want soft shadows, those are the ones that are less distinct and kind of fade off toward the edges. You can kind of apply that data all onto your scene at once, and everything kind of blends together to create a more realistic situation. And again, those are kind of older technologies that were used to save off the area, kind of pre-rendered scenes being displayed in a real-time environment by just adjusting the textures. So ambient occlusion, that's the next step kind of in our lighting discussion. And what is it? It's a very specific category of shadow rendering. It's an attempt to duplicate the grayish shadows that we see in corners, crevices, and the small spaces in and around objects. The very layman's term of that is how an object looks in its environment. So if you take a crate and you throw a crate into a dark train where only one side of the train is open and sunlight is pouring in, but that crate that should be very dark in a back corner is like super lit up for no reason, it's going to appear way out of context. Getting that crate to look like it should in a shadowed corner is ambient occlusion. And one game that I finally realized what ambient occlusion was Red Dead Redemption 2. And there were scenes in some of the, like, there was the scene where you get drunk, the whole like quest line where you get drunk in the bar, and it starts off in the daytime and you walk in, sunlight's pouring into the windows. There was a patch applied that I watched a Digital Foundry video where they improved the ambient occlusion, and they used this scene as an example, and they showed the pre and the post. And in the pre, some of the characters appeared to be lit by non-light sources. You're like, where's that light coming from? That's not, like, there should be a shadow where they're brightly lit by the direction of the sun coming into the windows, where they use God rays and like smoke, and that's like light shining through. That's volumetric occlusion, or light is shining through like smoke, and you should see the rays coming into the windows. Say they're coming in from the left, but the characters are very well lit from the right. It doesn't make any sense. It's like you're watching a movie and they just put a huge light on the bottom right hand corner of your screen shining onto the characters. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't allow the scene to like the scene to look good. So ambient occlusion was improved to allow the way that lights and the shadows are rendered to appropriately render the objects accordingly. So it's taxing, it's a thing, it's called ambient occlusion, and we're getting better at it. But Outriders, again, great example of poor ambient occlusion. So that's that.
Yep.
The next thing, it's loosely related to lighting, so I'll go over it quickly, but called tessellation. And the best example, the definition is tessellation is a way of doubling the triangles on the graphics hardware, so that 2 triangles become 4, 8 becomes 16, and so on. And when you do that, it allows you to like displace or smooth things out and make things increase of apparent detail. I love the idea of tessellation shown off in snow. So God of War, Red Dead Redemption 2, Horizon Zero Dawn, when you're running through snow and you see it like pile up around your feet and you leave a little trail, that generation of new geometry is called tessellation. Why it matters for lighting is because that tessellation that gets generated, so that's not pre-programmed, that's not pre-animated, that's dynamic, it's real time. You're walking through snow or sand and it's piling up. Well, that piling up needs to have a shadow. It needs to react to light differently, and your camera angles can change. So tessellation is involved in lighting because as you generate those things, as you move your character in a very dynamic way, the light engineers have to take that into consideration. And so there's algorithms in place to render lighting differently according to tessellation. And maybe you include those in your light maps and your shadow maps and the things that are going on behind the scenes. All of this stuff is super, super detailed. Like I said, each topic is its own episode by itself. So how do you think of that?
Again, I keep coming
Your
back
brain
to this
explodes?
idea. A little bit. Like, I keep coming back to the idea that, like, yeah, lighting design, once again, is just, like, think about when people, like, have a bunch of Christmas lights, and then, like, all the green ones are lit up in a certain way to look like a tree, and then some red ones are lit up to look like a star or Santa Claus or whatever. Like, that's what is happening on your TV, except just, like, teeny tiny lights. They're teeny tiny Christmas lights, and so they're all just lighting up one at a time.
Yep.
And so
hilariously enough,
tessellation helps us get even finer tuned individual pixels lighting up a certain way to do that. It's just crazy that, like, each one of these technologies is all about, like, tricking LEDs to light up a certain way.
It is. It really is. It's definitely lots of tricks are at play, because all this, we'll get into the challenges of all this rendering in a minute. But you talked about Christmas lights. The PlayStation 5 had come out in November, right before Christmas. So then I decorated for Christmas, and then it rained. I went outside and I took a picture of a puddle in my driveway with my reflections of the Christmas lights from the roof down onto the floor. And I was like, man, this ray tracing is awesome. And it was really funny because it looked like a video game, and that's exactly what's happening. So anyway, the last thing I want to talk about with lighting techniques is because it's a great jumping point on to ray tracing, which is our next question. It's this thing called screen space reflections, SSR. So if you're a PC gamer and you've seen the SSR setting, that's what this is. Space reflections is a technique for reusing screen space data to calculate reflections. It's often used to generate more subtle reflections like wet floor surfaces or puddles, and it works entirely within the screen area. It can only reflect what's on the screen. So if you have a thing behind you that's on fire and exploding that's not in your screen space, you will not see a reflection of it. A perfect example of screen space reflections was Spider-Man on the PS4, because it did not have any ray tracing whatsoever, and all of the buildings were very shiny, and you could see the reflections of all the other buildings around. But if you looked at it closely enough, you would notice all the reflections are things that are on the screen itself and not what's behind, which is pretty funny when you're looking at Spider-Man climbing a mirror, and all of the reflections in that mirror are not things that you can't see. It's all stuff in the same screen space because of the limitation. And there's a lot more technology behind how they do that and the techniques therein without taxing performance, because it's not just double rendering everything. There's a whole bunch of other tricks and stuff that developers use to allow that to happen. But that's kind of the de facto standard since Thief in 1998.
Yeah. Wow.
So there you go.
All right. Well, then that leads us greatly into our next. So then it's kind of a sub question to this question, but it's also a question in and of itself. What is ray tracing? Because ray tracing is a technology / technique that has been getting lots of attention in the last few years. Everyone's talking about RTX and RTX on. There's whole memes about RTX on and RTX off. What is ray tracing, and why is it a big deal? And as a sort of sub question to that is, why is it so hard to, like, why is it so taxing on a system that you have to sacrifice, in some cases, you have to sacrifice frame rates in order to get ray tracing?
Ray tracing involves tracing a path of a ray, a beam of light, within a 3D world. And that's at the pixel level. Project a ray for a single pixel into a 3D world, figure out what polygon that ray hits first, then color it appropriately. Now, one ray, it's not that much. But when you want to color an object that consists of
and
billions of polygons that consist of hundreds of pixels apiece, it can become extraordinarily taxing. But what's really awesome is that it creates the most realistic reflections you can get, but it also allows lighting to be that object that fills the room, like it really does. When you insert a flashlight beam into a whole entire room that's pitch dark, behaves the same way.
It's using light to simulate light. One of the things I love about ray tracing, just as a concept, is it's a technology that basically does what, like, painters do. You know, it's one of those leaps in video game artistry that is similar to, like, what painters were able to accomplish thousands of years ago when they finally figured out that they could simulate light with a painting. Now, if that sounds like I'm knocking ray tracing and being like, wow, painters have been doing this for thousands of years, it also took painters hundreds and hundreds of years to figure out how to do this, and video game designers have been able to do it in like 30 years. So like take
40?
that.
Yeah, the
40?
algorithms
Okay,
that
sure.
are the baseline for ray
Yeah.
tracing they came out in the 70s, and they weren't necessarily specific to video games and 3D rendered spaces. But
right,
the idea of ray tracing came out in the 70s. The algorithms we use today are still from that.
That's awesome. Yeah. But like in its fully, implemented form, then yeah. But still, it took a lot less time for us to do it with computers than it did for painters to figure out how to do it. But it's the same idea. It's using the medium that you have to like simulate what light does in the real world in a way that is got verisimilitude. That's got that idea of it's true to reality. So yeah, I think that's why ray tracing is super interesting from an artistic point of view. But we're talking about the technology, so what does it do?
Yeah, so to determine the amount of light falling onto a single pixel from one light source, the ray tracing formula needs to know how far away the light is, how bright it is, and the angle of the reflecting surface relative to the angle of the light source, before calculating how hot the reflected ray should be. The process is then repeated for any other light source, including indirect illumination from light bouncing off other objects in the scene. Calculations must be applied to the materials, determined by their level of diffuse or specular reflectivity, or both. Those are fancy words for like a piece of metal is going to be super shiny versus a carpet that's not. So that's the level of diffuse. Diffuse is actually like if you're hitting a skin, how does that light, if like you shine a flashlight into your hand, you can see how red around the light kind of passes through your skin. That level of diffuse into your body as what you see can be like light shining around someone's head in a video game, especially like the ears turn red as you would do in real life. So that's pretty cool. Specular reflectivity is the material, metal versus carpet, or both. Transparent or semi-transparent surfaces, so now you have glass, water, they refract rays, adding further rendering headaches, and everything necessary has an artificial reflection limit, because without one, rays would be traced to infinity, like the real world. So there's lots of limitations put on it. But most recently, Doom Eternal's ray tracing patch had come out for consoles, and you can see, which is amazing, you can walk up to a glass window, and behind it is an object, but in the window, you can see the reflection of Doom Guy, your character. And on the floor, underneath of that window, you can see whatever's behind the window also reflected off the floor. And so you can see it working in all the way. And then your gun also has like the reflections of stuff. What's great about ray tracing is it's in a full 3D world. It's not just what's visible on the screen. So if your gun is made of metal, like in Ratchet and Clank, when you have the executioner shotgun, the stuff that's blowing up behind you is reflected off your gun, even when you don't see it. And same with Ratchet on your back. Yeah. He's all like made of metal, and he's got ray traced reflections as well. And so you can see the entire world. I loved Ratchet and Clank's, like, the way they handled glass, especially like domed glass, and how it bent the light correctly. And that's all like ray tracing. It's absolutely crazy and awesome. And that's just the reflection aspect. Jumping into the non-reflection stuff, like I talked about with Returnal in my favorite things segment, or DLC, it's global illumination, the most intensive ray tracing technique. This is more taxing than anything else, but global illumination casts rays on a per pixel basis across an entire scene and updates dramatically or dynamically to accommodate even subtle changes in lighting. While the name might make you think of something similar to shadows, global illumination is really more about indirect lighting. And that goes back to kind of ambient occlusion conversations where you do, and I specifically mentioned that train with one side open and the sun pouring in and a crate in the corner, because Metro Exodus also had their ray tracing patch on PS5 and Xbox Series X. So that's a great example of that, where you can see entire scenes rendered entirely different. Again, go to Digital Foundry. That's how I gleaned most of my knowledge about all this stuff and my appreciation for it. They do a great comparison for Metro Exodus on old gen and new gen consoles with the ray tracing, and they show exactly how entire scenes are different. There's no more pre-rendered lighting applied to textures or bump mapping. It's all real-time rendering of ray traced reflections and ray traced global illumination, and it makes the scenes look so much more realistic. It is insane.
Yeah,
and we're doing it on consoles. It's
awesome. I was going to ask kind of again, once again, another tiny sub question to this question is like, what should people who maybe aren't like well versed in what this stuff does and are just like, I just want to enjoy a game, but like, part of our podcast is to be educational and help people appreciate things they might not have before. So my question would be like, what would you tell people to look for? An amateur, what would you tell them to look for as a way of trying to get them to appreciate the ray tracing of certain games? If they're like, I don't know if I want to have ray tracing turned on or if I want to have performance turned on. My instinct is performance because I don't really know what to look for, like, other than it just looks better. You know what I mean? Like, what would you specifically be like, appreciate, like, look how the game does this? I would say one of those things would be like, not just reflections, because those are really cool. Like when people pointed out that you can see the reflection of your character in people's eyes in Control, that's just like, whoa. But like, who's going to notice that when playing a game where you're shooting
you're moving so fast and it's like,
chucking, chucking forklifts at things, like, you're not going to notice that. I would say the most impressive thing that I've noticed with the ray tracing is seeing how light changes from moment to moment is hugely different. Like I've seen it in Final Fantasy VII Remake. It's just like you can, because that was a pretty game before. It was a beautiful game that did lighting really well before ray tracing, like before the ray tracing upgrades. But now it's like you can see just like cloud moving through an environment, and the way that the light completely changes frame to frame is insane with ray tracing now that they have that. What would you say are other things to look out for?
Well, for amateurs, like reflections are the most obvious one. And so I would say go find Spider-Man Miles Morales or the Spider-Man PS4 like new gen patch on PS5 and go climb buildings and scale the city. Like, because Insomniac is insane and somehow have managed to do a 60 frames per second with ray tracing rendering solution, like go do that. And you'll see all of the things like on the street, cars and pedestrians in your skyscrapers as you web sling around or like climb, because web slinging is really fast and motion blur and stuff might drown that stuff out. But if you stop and like climb a very reflective building, you will see all of the things actually behind Spider-Man reflected in the windows. And it's such an easy mode to transition from ray tracing to non-ray tracing for the actual performance mode that you can turn it off. And so like, you can really see a difference. It's really quick and anyone could do it that's got a PS5. And that's where I would start for an amateur to at least know what to look for. And then with the ambient occlusion and the global illumination solutions going on, that's where I would say like Returnal does it really well. So maybe find some YouTube videos if you don't want to fork out $70 for a demo and lighting. I wouldn't blame anyone for that.
For a demo and lighting that will kill you and punish you over and over and over again.
Yeah, and like that's a wonderful example. Like look at how the bullets, the blue, purple, and red laser beams and everything else, it doesn't just reflect off the light. It actually, light does fill the room. It fills the space, and you can see how it affects the objects in the room that are not the main character, that are the things in the sides. There's so much different like things in the environment to make it feel filled out and feel real. So those things are affected by the global illumination of ray tracing. So that's the other example I would say for that. The earliest example of ray tracing in a real game was Battlefield 5, but that was kind of locked out to the PC gamers that could afford the higher GPUs, like the RTX cards from NVIDIA. And they did stuff that was pretty cool with like in the street, you would see a car that's all shiny and there'd be explosions behind you and fire behind you that you didn't see. And like that would be reflected in the car. And they even used a tech demo to show like you could see enemies coming around the corner through a reflection on the cars as well. So that's kind of cool and a way of showing off what ray tracing can do. And that's like a multiplayer implication that's pretty legit.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, we are 100% out of time. So I want to hear what the listeners' thoughts are, what Pod Smashers think about lighting design, ambient occlusion, tessellation, gray screen reflections, ray tracing. Are these all words that are super meaningful to you? Do you think you learned something? Or are you like, I could care less? We want to hear those thoughts and more. So, Termite, where can the good Pod Smashers of the internet share their thoughts if they have them? Also, I do realize that the phrase is "you couldn't care less," so that's a slight correction.
Thank you for the correction, because
I don't know why I said "could care less." I was like, "What the heck? Could not care less."
The phrase is definitely that.
I could not care less what is accurate or not. So please tell me where they can listen or share their thoughts. They have them.
If you want to respond to us, the best place to go is atbitpodsmash.com, 80bitpodsmash.com. It's our landing website with links to all of our social media outlets where you can contact us, ask us questions, give us your thoughts, comments, concerns, thoughts, and ideas. I may have said thoughts twice, but whatever. You can contact us there, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We have a subreddit as well. You can do anything you need to interact with us there. You can also find all of our podcast outlets. So if you love this show and you want to subscribe to more, every Monday at midnight, the shows drop, and you can find us at Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, whatever your flavor is, we're there. And if we are not somewhere you want us to be, let us know, and we'll do what we can to put ourselves there. You can also find us on twitch.tv/80bitpodsmash on most Mondays and Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern. Our lives have gotten in the way of some of our more recent stuff, but Monday night we do a news show at 8 p.m. and Wednesday nights we do a gameplay live stream of something we're digging. We usually alternate back and forth between the two of us. This week I am streaming in just 2 days. I think I'm going to pick up my Turok 2 playthrough because I need to finish that game and get it off my plate, and it's been a lot of fun.
Tomorrow's Wednesday.
Hey, I am playing, but from the... You're correct. Last Wednesday, the audience listening to this on Monday, a week ago, not even a week ago, I had played Turok 2. So be sure to check that out. We also have a YouTube channel where all of these videos, all of these Twitch streams go to YouTube for VOD consumption, and a link to our YouTube channel is also at 80bit Pod Smash. Lastly, but definitely not least, we have a Discord server, and you can find the link to that in all of our show notes. We would love to have you interact with our community, ask us questions, talk to us, interact, play with us, play games with us. I'm trying to play some Sea of Thieves Pirate's Life, so if we can get a bunch of people together to play that, it'd be a lot of fun. Weird ad hoc things that you should subscribe to us, like us, so that you're made aware of what we're doing. You don't miss anything.
Huzzah! All right, so next week we are bringing back our genre deep dives. We thought that we had covered them all, but no, there are more genres to be had. So we're going to do a deep dive on survival games.
Oh no!
Oh, but
those
a genre
fun.
That both of us intensely dislike, but we gotta do it. We gotta talk about them, so we'll talk about them next week.
Yep. Great. Sounds awesome. So, without further ado, we will see you next week.